Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Change Your Mind podcast, where we explore the intersection between personal development, spirituality, and science. We're going to dive deep into the spiritual component today, and I'm really excited to do that. I have two amazing guests, but before I introduce them, a couple quick announcements. If you head to the links in the show notes, you will find all sorts of goodies. You'll find a link to my book, Change Your Mind to Change Your Reality. You will find links to my guest links. You'll find courses, free downloads, live masterclasses, all sorts of things. And then, as always, this podcast is part of the Los Angeles Tribune Podcast Network. We are doing a lot in the personal development realm, starting to have events. Things are getting really exciting. So be sure to check us out there. Okay, I am so excited for today's episode because I have two of the most special people on with me. I have Subhan and Shanti. So Subhan and Shanti run the World of Meditation Center in Seattle, where they share the meditations and wisdom of their teacher Osho. They have been practicing meditation for over 40 years and have traveled the world both as students and teachers of spiritual study. And just on a personal note, these two humans are two of the most beautiful people that I've ever met. I consider them dear friends and teachers. I've gotten to work with them over the years, and they are just phenomenal. So tune into this episode, like, comment, share, subscribe. Subhan and Shanti, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Pleasure is all mine. Okay, so I start off every single podcast episode the same way, and that is by asking my guests what their origin story is. So I want to hear from both of you, what is it that led you to Osho's teachings in the first place, and how did you even get started? I think you both met him in India, right? So tell me that story for both of you.
All right. Well, for me, I actually had moved to California when I was around, I can't remember, 22. I lived in Mendocino, California, and I heard the word meditation. And the minute I heard the word, it was like, I've got to learn that. I've got to do that. I didn't know what it was. I would read a few books, couldn't understand a word of it, but I just knew I had to do it. And a friend of mine was into Zazen, and that's one of the books I read. Even though I didn't understand it, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to sit Zazen. And so my first time sitting Zazen, I sat on a cushion. It was in the countryside, Mendocino. It was, in Mendocino. And I felt all this pain shoot up my spine. And though I didn't know anything really of this realm, I had heard the word Kundalini, and I went, wow, is this my Kundalini rising? I didn't know what it was, but this pain was shooting up my spine. And then after a sec, I would say like the most 2 minutes, my legs were hurting, this pain was up and down my spine, everything. And I rolled off the cushion, these little black cushions you sit on. And there was a bee. I had sat on a bee.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
The pain going up my spine. And I just laughed. Even though I knew nothing of meditation or anything, I went, this is perfect for Zen. I feel like I actually feel, and I once asked Osho, the mystic I'm connected with, I just said, I feel like I've meditated before. And he acknowledged I had meditated before. But who I am now, didn't know anything about that world. But what I did know was I couldn't sit still. I just couldn't. I tried Zazen a few times, and it was, though there was no bee, it was very painful, and really 5 minutes, or it wasn't working. And somehow I had money saved to go to India. And at a certain point, my friend said, I think it's your time you go to India. Everything you could learn from Mendocino is is over. You know, you've learned your lesson. And I felt he was right. I didn't really know what gurus were at all. I didn't know at all what they were. And I actually was on my way to meet a Zen master in Japan. I didn't know any Zen masters. I was just going to go to Japan and meet a Zen master. That was my journey. But I went via Europe and then India. And I always said I met my Zen master in India, because when I got into India, I was in Delhi, and I met I always say within 10 minutes, it might have been longer, but I met these two young people who were disciples of Osho. And one of them was telling me about, just mentioning how they were going to a meditation camp. And as she was saying it, an inner voice inside me went, oh, you're going to meet that man when you go to Bombay. And it's about 3,000 miles away, Delhi and Bombay, about 3,000 miles away, or something like that. And I remember the I was like, not the deeper inner voice, but the I was like, to Bombay? I mean, I was just a hippie traveling in India. And 9 months later, there was a long story in between, but there I was on Christmas Day. I had met a disciple of Osho's in Nepal, and she and I began traveling together. And at one point she said, I just want you to meet Osho. And so on Christmas Day, 1973, I met Osho. And I just sitting in his presence. I had met some other gurus too. And like Nim Crawley Baba, maybe you've heard of him. That was Ram Dass's guru. And he just waved me away. Like he just went like that. And I remember thinking, he doesn't want me as a disciple. But I don't know who was thinking that thought, because I didn't, anyway, but some part of me knew he didn't want me. It turned out a few months later, like about 3 months later, he actually passed. And I happened to be in Nepal, and I met these two young women who were crying in a very early in the morning in a little tea shop. And I said, and there were beautiful tears. I can't describe it. It wasn't sad. It was, some beauty was there. And I said, why are you crying? And they said, our master passed. And there was no Google or no internet then, nothing. But a bird had woken one of them up, and she started playing her flute in the night. And then a telegram. It was all done. You might not know what telegrams are, but a telegram came that their master had died. And I said, oh, he sent me away. And they said, oh, he sent all of us away, except for a few disciples. But anyway, that's an aside. So I met him, but when I met Osho, I fell into a state of meditation. And what to me was, I went into meditation. The body was still, I moved in. And then he asked me, well, tell me about your meditation. And I was so shocked, because no other guru I had met had asked me about my meditation, which I couldn't do, anyway. And so I said, well, I want to meditate, but I can't sit still. And I was sure he was going to say, well, then you have to leave. You have to go, because you have to be able to sit still. But he didn't. He had a big smile on his face, and he said, no, it's very difficult in this day and age. Especially you're from the West. It's not even considered proper to sit still. That's the devil's hands, That's work. And he said, and your body isn't used to sitting in these postures. But he said, even for Indians, and this is 1973, it's harder for them to sit still now. And he said, that's why he developed active meditations. And he said, you do my meditations, and I promise you'll be able to sit still. And I was so thirsty. So he gave over the years different meditations to experiment with. And 5 years later, he suddenly turned to me out of the blue and said, "Oh, now you can sit zazen." I was so shocked that he had said that he even remembered.
Yeah.
And also, I didn't really want to just sit. I wanted to do active meditations. Though I did do a Zazen course, which had active meditations and sitting. But now I'm 77, so I like to sit. But I did so many active meditations. I'm so grateful. And that to me was what I wanted to share when I came back from India many years later. It's like, maybe there's other people who want to meditate but can't sit still. Maybe these meditation techniques will guide them into the inner world, so they'll find where they're to be, where their journeys to start. It might not be with Osho, it might be with someone else. It doesn't matter. It's just these are keys to help us move inside. So that's my thing.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I always think about that too, because you've shared it with me before about how you told him you couldn't sit still and he didn't judge you or push you away. And it's like, oh, well, I've developed a meditation for that. So yeah, and we're going to talk about the meditations too, because they're so powerful. Subhan, I'd love to hear your story.
Okay. Well, I was a criminal lawyer in Baltimore City. So you can only imagine what that is like, to have caseloads every single day, 5 days a week, and also going to penitentiaries and interviewing clients and doing all that for 7 years. And the first couple of years, it was actually exciting, to be in court, to be a defense attorney. And I learned my lessons well about law, and I really enjoyed. And then everything started to go downhill. My relationship with my first wife also was kind of breaking apart at that time. And it just got really clear that something was awry, and I didn't know what it was. I was going to the Green Earth vegetarian restaurant. I had become a vegetarian at that time. This is back in 1979, January. And I saw a friend of mine from high school that I hadn't seen like in 14 years. And we looked at each other and we laughed and smiled and gave hugs. And then he said, "How are you doing?" And then I heard myself say something that I never said before, probably never since. "Do you really want to know?" Mm. And he looked at me with a really sincere look on his face. And he said, "Yes. How are you doing?" And I said, "Well," and the words that came out were, "I feel like I'm taking 3 steps forward and 10 steps backwards. Mm. I'm in a profession that I'm not happy with at all. And maybe I'm getting closer to leading it, but I don't know what the next step is. And there's so many questions I have about so many things. It's a bit of a chaos." Well, he said, next to the Green Earth, there's the Aquarian Age bookstore, which was owned by his brother, Bennett Hoffman. And he said, "Why don't you go in and chat with him? Maybe he could give you some understanding." So I went in, and in those days, he was one of the first that had overstuffed sofas and chairs that you could actually really get into and relax into and read some of his books. So I sat down, and he came over and introduced himself. And I heard myself say something that was very strange, but these are the words that came out. "Of all the books in this store, is there one you'd recommend over all the others?" He looked at me, and I can only describe that there was a twinkle in his eye. And he went like this with his finger. And he directed me over to a table that had maybe 8 or 9 books, all by Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, which is the name that he was known as at that time. And I looked, and they all have pictures of Osho in these really strange garb. And there was a photo shoot of him with about 20 hats from all over the world. Somebody brought him a collection of hats. So they took photographs. Well, they became the pictures on these books. And boy, was that weird just to see all these. And some part of me said, oh my God, not another guru bullshitter. Because at that time, I had been reading everything I could put my hands on. Ram Dass, Meher Baba, Krishnamurti, I don't know, I can keep on going. There were Viktor Frankl, Alan Watts, and I would feel like I was getting some kind of intellectual understanding, but no experience that could back it up, that could make it something real. Anyway, beside the fact that I said that, I picked up 3 of his books and bought them and took them home. The first book was a book that was originally published in India and then made in the US by an American firm called Only One Sky. The Indian name for it was Tantra, the Supreme Understanding, the Song of Tilopa, one of the 4 tantric masters from the Himalayas. I opened it up. I started reading it. I started laughing. I started crying. I felt that he was saying things that I always knew, but I could never put into words. These are just an attempt to put into words what was happening.
Yeah.
And it just hit me to the core that what he was saying. I read a little more and put the book down. Came back to it later that evening. Next thing I knew is I was reading the whole book. And I even still know parts of it, although it took me 4 readings over the 30 years later, and also to listen to him on tape, because he was also recorded. And I knew that something had to change, something was going to change. I didn't know what it was. It was absolutely a mystery to me. Within a very short period of time, it was clear to me that I didn't want to stay practicing law anymore. I gave a 2-week notice, and I stopped law on April 1st.
April Fool's Day.
April Fool's Day, 1970. I woke up the next day, and I got out of bed, made some breakfast, did a few things in the house, got in the car, went over to the library, and I'd always wanted to just be in the library and explore without any notion that I had to be doing something at some future moment that day. Well, here was a day. It was totally open. I read the newspaper from cover to cover. I read the Newsweek magazine from cover to cover. At that time, that was the liberal magazine, as opposed to Time, the more conservative one. And then I got hungry, and it was like, oh, what am I going to do? Okay, well, there's a pizzeria about 4 blocks away. Went to the pizzeria, ordered pizza, and realized I didn't have to rush. I had nowhere to go. I had nothing I had to do. It was the first time that I could remember in my life that I had that feeling. And the pizza was so delicious. And I consumed, I don't know, 2 or 3 pieces because I could buy it by the piece there. I went back to the library. I checked out a couple of books. I came home. I did a few things. I can't even remember what. I played the piano. I had an upright piano in the tenant house that I was living in on a 370-acre farm. And it was the first time that I went through a whole day with nothing that I had to do. And that became a small key that was kind of ingrained in a lot of the sharing that I do with people, about asking them to take a blank piece of paper, put a line down, write everything you do in your particular day, yesterday or today, and what you want to do and what you have to do. Because I realized that day there was nothing I had to do. And it was the most freedom I'd ever felt in my entire life. And it was the beginning of a whole new way of experiencing life and finding my way through this maze of mystery and pain and misunderstandings. But I did read in one of the books that he was in that time, he had gone to Pune, India, from Bombay, and that he was available. And I just realized, I've got to meet this guy. So by the time I really decided I wanted to do that, it was early June of '79. My daughter and I went to breakfast at a restaurant about 30 miles from where I lived, because we were in the country, deep in the country, in Howard County in Maryland. And I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to take care of the house. I decided, okay, I'm going to get a 3-month visa, and I'm going to go be there for 3 months, and then I'm going to come back. I'm with my daughter every other week. She's with her mom 1 week, with me in the next week. And her elementary school was right down the road from where I had lived. And I'm sitting there, and there's a table next to us, and there's 2 women talking, and one woman says to the other one, you know, I need a place to stay, not permanent, but maybe for the next, 3 to 6 months. And I'm sitting there going, is this real? And I looked at her and I said, I have a space in Howard County, about maybe 30 miles from here, that's going to be available for 3 months. Are you interested? And she said, oh, I'm definitely interested. So we made arrangements for her to come and look at the place. I got my tickets. September 27th, I was on a plane to India, feeling like I was a piece of metal being pulled by a magnet. That's the only way I can describe it. Arrived in Pune, October 2nd, 1979. I went into what is called darshan, which means to see the master, and I took sannyas from him. That's another long story, sannyas. What is sannyas? But as he was talking to me, he was this ordinary human being sitting on a chair, gesticulating with his hand and talking to me about the name that he had given me. And I'm looking, and I suddenly look into his eyes, and I'm shocked because there's nobody home. On the surface, ordinary human being speaking ordinary English, perfectly understandable, gesticulating with the hand. I'm assuming it was his left hand. That's what I remember. And there's nobody home. And I looked a little deeper, and I realized that I could go into those eyes and disappear. And for a moment, I started moving in that direction, and I got so scared that I was going to disappear that I pulled back. And then I didn't remember anything that he said, except when he was talking. My name is Prato Subhan, and he was talking about Prato, prayer. And he said, prayer is a prayer to God, but it is a silent prayer to God. No words will get you to God. That's the only thing I can remember of about 15 minutes with him and him talking to me. Later, so I stayed the 3 months, and I'm on a train going back to Bombay to get the flight back to the US. And I'm trying to find the person who made the decision to stay there for 3 months, because I didn't want to leave. And there were quite a number of people who actually stayed there the whole period from 1973-4 all the way up to 1981 when he left and came to the US. But I just recognized that whoever had gone there was no longer present. And I had tremendous sadness for leaving. So I made a decision that I was going to return. It took me 1.5 years before I actually was preparing to return, only to find out by a phone call from New Jersey that he had arrived in the US. So maybe that's the point where I'll stop, because you wanted to know more about Rajneeshpuram and about what happened since then. But I've been now a disciple for going on 45 years, the most extraordinary years imaginable, the most mysterious, mystical, beyond any comprehensive words to describe it. And I'm beginning to love the space where words fail. And just recently, I read a quote from Osho where he said, except for silence, everything else is imagination. Oh my God. And I recognized in the experiences that I've had with him since the beginning, and who knows what other experiences there were before what I call the beginning, that silence is the only essential nature, and that everything else is built upon it and can distort our experience and stop us from experiencing the silence.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. You were talking about getting goosebumps and crying and laughing, and I felt that as you were talking. I had goosebumps so many times during your stories. I'm over here welling up because I can just feel it. I can just feel that from you. And I had no idea what your story was, and it was so great to hear it. And I got to tell you, when you were explaining what it was like to stare into his eyes, that was my experience staring into your two eyes, the two of you. And I think I say that in my book. And I have a nanny watching my baby right now, and I was telling her how excited I was because I got to talk to you two today, and I was explaining who you were, and I said that same thing. So you have embodied that yourself. Both of you have. So before we get into Rajneeshpuram, for people who are listening and aren't familiar with Osho, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what his main teachings are, what maybe his most profound teaching that you've taken away is, just so people have a little bit of a sense of like what it is that he teaches.
You want to go first?
Yeah. I know that's a big ask.
Do you have a couple of years?
No, okay. For me, I'm going to say the active meditations are really, really important for this day and age. Also, his discourses are, I've not sat with other mystics, so really been a disciple of other mystics, at least in this life. So, but the discourses, he speaks on so many different topics and areas, from politics. He would speak on politics. I would sit there, why are you talking politics? That's not spiritual. I remember thinking that, but oh my God, I'm so grateful that I somehow imbibed it when I watch the circuses that are going on now. I can really understand more what's happening from that. The other thing to me was really important, I mean, this is for me, is I had been in a marriage before coming to Osho that ended, but we didn't make love enough. And I wanted more love making. And so even before I met Osho, I mean, being in California in the early 70s, it was just available. You could experiment with that realm, and I had met some other people who were with some guru, but they had to they had to be celibate in their meditation with their guru. And I remember looking at them, and I could feel they were dripping with hormones. I mean, they were young like me. I knew what it was to want to make love and not be able to. And there I was looking at it, and I remember going, I want to meet a guru. I mean, if I do, whatever they are, I didn't even know what they were, but I mean, he has to like sex. And Osho is not against sex. It's not, I mean, and even there's ways you can use it, like if you, where you can move into deep meditation. And that was my experience, was actually in orgasm, the mind is gone. You're in another dimension. it's temporary, but it goes, And so I love that part. And also, he includes in his teachings a lot of dance. And I used to be a dancer. And the last time I actually danced with, I can't even think of her name, but I felt it was in California, and I felt, wow, she has such a big, Ann Halpern, I think was her name, such a big ego. My other dance teachers didn't, some of them had, but this one, I went, if I ever have another dance teacher, it has to be someone, no ego, like no ego. And then I meet Osho, and a lot of the meditations have dance and movement and celebration. So he'll work with those elements of celebration, and yet at the same time, he develops meditations where we cry for 3 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 7 days, called the Mystic Rose. Yeah. So you're moving, and he'll explain the depth of the pain and pain for many lives, actually, and how we have to experience our pain. And so it's like, to me, it's like vast. The teachings are vast, like incredibly vast. And they, yeah, that's my.
I love those answers. And I just have to put my own little story in. I remember before I met you two reading this amazing book called Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender. And it's all about how you have to release your repressed and suppressed emotions, right, to heal. And it was like, intellectually, I got that. Like, okay, yes, I understand that. But like, how do you do that? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I met you two and did dynamic meditation, Osho's dynamic meditation, and that catharsis part, that I was finally like, okay, this is how you do it. Right. And he even explains in that book, like, emotions are layered. Like, you might be feeling anger one moment, and then underneath that is sadness, and it switches. And that's always been my experience in dynamic meditation with you two. So I just, yes, absolutely. The moving meditations are so powerful. So powerful. Subhan, do you want to just maybe tell me one or two of your favorite teachings by Osho? Or
here's what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
In the first book, Tantra, the Supreme Understanding, he opens it up because Tilopa is saying to his disciple Naropa, there were actually 4 in the lineage, and then it stopped, that it's impossible to put truth into words. But for you, Naropa, I'm going to try and do it. So that was like the first taste of a very extensive experience and understanding that came to me from Osho. And it's just simply this. There's a tremendous identification that we have with the mind, with the biocomputer. And that's because of our upbringing. That's because of the way the mind functions. It's a number of different things, but this is the reality. And along comes someone who has climbed the mountain all the way to the top and has dissociated from the mind. We call it enlightenment. We call it remembrance. We call it a number of different things. So they're in a reality, and they're in a mind body, but they're telling us that there's no more personality, that this personality has disappeared. So they're telling us a number of different things. So this was one of the keys for me in my own understanding and learning, and in what I share. How to get people who know nothing of what is beyond the mind to recognize that there is something beyond the mind. It's no thing. It's no mind, no thingness, whatever you want to call it. It's the unmanifested, all kinds of names, but they're irrelevant because the mind doesn't have any experience to understand what it is. So this is the first huge, major hurdle for everyone to recognize on some level that there is something other than the mind. And the fact is that when I started to look, and Osho suggested this, to look and experience whether there's any moments where you are in a state where the mind is not so active. And I remember the first one I remembered, I was 19 years old and there was an automobile accident. I slid on ice, trying to move aside from a car that was going the other way. And next thing I know is I put my foot on the brake and the car is just sliding, not so fast, maybe 20 miles an hour, into a parked car up ahead. It took a year to get to the parked car.
Yeah.
The silence was deafening. And I knew that the hands were wrapped around the steering wheel, but they were irrelevant because there was no way to steer the car. And at that moment, it took me a while to recognize what had happened, that the mind basically looked at the whole situation and says, can't figure this one out, bye, sucker, and it disappeared for what probably was 15 or 20 seconds, but what felt like an eternity. And then boom, hit the car. And the mind says, I know what to do with this one. Oh my God, my mother's car. I was 19 driving her car. The insurance, what am I going to do? Blah, 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 blah. And then later I remembered when I was 6 years old, looking up at the sky. And we lived at that time in Annapolis, Maryland, which was a very small city, population 10,000, capital of the state, but very small, very, very rural in many ways. And very few lights, and I could see 1 billion stars. And I was lying on the ground with a friend of mine. We were both looking up, and all I could do was, wow, wow. And that was the second time when the mind looked up at all of these stars. I mean, billions of them everywhere. The whole black sky coated with them, and the mind recognized that couldn't figure it out. Bye. Later in life, I started having other experiences that were somewhat similar to that, and began to recognize that there were cracks in this container called the mind, where these experiences of what was beyond the mind could filter in, and did. And then Osho gave meditations, and dynamic was the one for me, that there was an experience in it, that there was something beyond the mind. There was this silence, this stillness, this peacefulness, this utter relaxation. So what I want to suggest is that Osho has been teaching again and again and again two things. Be as aware as you possibly can, and watch. He talks about watching. He said it 7,000 times over the years. That there is an ability for us, because of that crack that I referred to, where watching is available. To start by watching the mind first, because it's the easiest. Body, I'm sorry. Watching the body first, because it's the easiest. And once you have the ability to watch the body, then it's much easier to watch the mind. But until that watchfulness starts to happen, there's so much identification with the mind as who I am, that it's virtually impossible to get beyond that experience. Do dynamic, when the stop comes, there's a moment of possibly being in that experience. Possibly. I don't even want to say that it's there. It's always there. That's what I understand and what I experience. It's always there. It's that the mind comes in and blocks the ability to be there. That's all. So it is tremendously arduous on one level, and it's incredibly simple and easy on another level. And that's really the strangeness of this path of being on this planet Earth, finding our way back home. And that's what I would say I take away from Osho, if I could say it in 5 minutes as I just did.
Yeah, so beautifully said. And those are the teachings that you share all the time too. And I've heard you say that all the time. We are not the mind. I've sought counsel with you when I was going through hard times, and that was the reminder you always gave me. And it's, like you said, it's so simple, but so profound. Okay, so tell me about life on the ranch. Were you the third person on the ranch? Alina told me that you were the third person.
I was the third person on the ranch. Sheila and her husband Jayananda were the first two people there. When I went up, I was invited up to New Jersey, where Osho came at first. And when I got there, Sheila told me that the commune was in the process of purchasing a large piece of property in Oregon. And they wanted me, because I was a lawyer, to help them close the sale. So I flew to Oregon as literally the third person from our community on the ranch, and I closed the property with them, and we started making plans for people to come. So that's the beginning of Rajneeshpuram. So, and I had this incredible opportunity to be there alone, basically alone, and I walked through the areas where there was some kind of structures that were then there. The rest of it, size of Washington, D.C., and basically totally wild.
I mean, I saw the documentary. It's amazing what you all built. Wasn't there like an airstrip?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, there were so many things. There were roads and airstrips and many, many trees, because there were only shrubs there at the time. And there were
farmland, and
there was water that was converted into lakes,
a dam,
and a huge dam, and a restaurant, and
like
actually
mall.
2 restaurants, and a mall, and good Lord,
lots of housing,
and a hotel. and room for 5,000 people to live,
and big meditation hall.
And a big meditation hall that could hold 20,000 people.
Wow. I can't comprehend the size of all that. So did people work then? Like, who was running the hotel and the restaurant and all that? Like, people had jobs?
We were, yes.
We all were.
Did you all just kind of trade off doing everything?
Well, it depended. It was really very individual. I came out there afterwards. I'd been the lawyer settling the property, and now I went back to New Jersey and stayed there for a while, and then I went back to the ranch. And the first thing that I was told was, we need lawyers. And I went, I swore I would never be a lawyer. There I was settling the property as a lawyer, because I was a member of the Maryland State Bar at the time. So I had the ability to do that. And I just looked at them and I said, if lawyers are needed, I'll be a lawyer. And what happened was that many people came and offered their services. Sometimes people were asked what they wanted to do. Many times they were told what was needed. If they wanted to come, this is what's needed. Mm-hmm. And you have that background, so we need you. And sometimes cleaners were needed. People driving bulldozers were needed. People who flew planes were needed. All kinds of different backgrounds. So yeah, we did all the work. I mean, people drove buses during the summer festival, the first World Festival. I was a bus driver. I stopped being a lawyer for 2 weeks and was driving a bus. Boy, did I have some experiences. Because I'd never driven a big vehicle like that before. Ever.
I bet you had all kinds of experiences.
I certainly did. I had training for 1 day. And there I was driving it was a school bus. And anyway, so yeah, so we all pitched in those areas, either that we were proficient at and that we were good at and that we wanted to do, or things that were important that had to be done.
And you just learned the skill. Like when I came, I had run the whole cleaning department in India. So I was asked to do that again, but I was totally burned out of doing it. So then they didn't know what to do with me. I don't know. So I just did something, and then all of a sudden I was in the bakery, and I learned how to bake, and then I ended up being the manager, baking sometimes for 15,000 people. Yeah, and you just learn. Like people didn't know construction, and they learned it. And then now they're women, even they're running big construction companies and stuff. It's learned it. I don't know.
That's awesome. So tell me about what was it like living there? Like, what was your day? What were your days like when you weren't working? Like, tell me about it.
Before I do that, I just want to say one thing as kind of like a preface to everything.
Yeah.
Anywhere with Osho was a mystery school. Anywhere. On the surface, on the circumference, on the top of the ocean, we had the ordinary day-to-day activities and things that we did and schedules and things like that. But we're with a living master who was creating a space for us to have so many things confront us. Our sexuality, our relationships, our dealing with people, our dealing with power. I used to say, and maybe it's still true, that in Pune 1, the area from 74 to 81, was mostly learning about sexuality and love. Pune 2 was mostly about power. What power is, what power was, my relationship to it. And and other people had other experiences, so I can't speak for anyone else but myself. Okay, so day to day, got up in the morning, had a bite to eat, went to work, was a lawyer, but a very different lawyer and lawyering, because we were all in one big room. Instead of having small cubicles or having, separate offices, we were all in one room. So there was a lot of sharing, a lot of questioning, a lot of trying to figure things out. There were 5 of us that became members of the Oregon State Bar. And then there were an additional maybe 5 or 6 lawyers who never took the bar. And then there were literally, I don't know, maybe 50 people who started to support the work that we did.
Wow.
Everything from stenography to filing to, to everything you can imagine, to even helping us doing the research and stuff.
But we worked 12 hours a day. I mean, that's so much got done. And the emphasis was, it was Sheila, who was in Osho's secretary at the time. And her emphasis was on work, not on meditation. That wasn't her interest, her world. So everything, like, it was up to you to bring your own meditation into the work and into the connecting with people. And that's pretty much what I did. Osho was in silence. We didn't see him until the last year or 2 years. We'd see him, but not sit in have a discourse or anything like that.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Until 1985, the beginning of 1985, he started speaking.
Yeah. So it was a whole different world than in India. I did want to say something. The books, he didn't write them. They're all taken from the discourses and then
they're transcribed.
Yeah, made into books. And he spoke in different series or different topics. Yeah.
Just about anything you could think of, he spoke about.
So the ranch was a different, very different. Very different. And then what, what came, like the prejudice that happened and the fear, about who are these people? What are they doing? And so dealing with that, and actually having a U.S. government that wanted Osho dead, basically. Because there was no understanding of mystic or teachings or gurus at that time. There just wasn't.
There was a group of people called 1,000 Friends of Oregon, and they formed an organization to preserve the Willamette Valley, because what they saw was between Portland and Salem, which is the capital, there was a whole beautiful agricultural reality in Oregon, very much green and lush and natural. What was happening was, from Salem towards Portland and from Portland towards Salem, they were starting to build infrastructure, and they were starting to build housing, and they were starting to build factories. And so 1,000 Friends came together and they said, we've got to stop this. We've got to maintain the nature here, or else we'll lose what the value of Oregon really is. And they did some connection with the Eastern Oregon, which is where the Rajneeshpuram was, where the ranch was, and the farmers out there, the people that were farming out there, hated them because these were really free-spirited people. They didn't want to be told to do anything, and they were in a totally different realm. They were not in a plush green area. Eastern Oregon is basically almost like desert. And so it's a hard reality to do agriculture out there.
Overgrazed land.
And so every once in a while, the 1,000 Friends would come out and try and tell them that they were violating the laws that they had helped to pass in the Oregon legislature that would protect the Willamette Valley, and try to apply it out there. And they hated them. And basically, 1,000 Friends kind of gave up. They really couldn't stop them from doing it.
The farmers hated that.
We came in. Oh, all of a sudden, these farmers that hated 1,000 Friends became their affiliate to get us out, to stop us from doing the kinds of things that we wanted to do there. We wanted to create a city. Well, they said, you can't do that. It's in violation of the land use laws. If you want an incorporated city, you have to go to Antelope, which was 30 miles away from the place where we were, which is this little tiny community of 36 people, and they were all dying off. Just up the road was a place called Shanico, which was already a ghost town, and Antelope was becoming a ghost town. It had one store, which was like a luncheon counter and a post office. And the 1,000 Friends said, if you want to do anything commercial, you've got to do it in Antelope, because they are an incorporated city. So we didn't want to do that. We wanted to do it on the ranch, but we saw that the laws were going to make it impossible for us to do it at that time. So we went into Antelope and we bought some property. We paid a lot of money for it, because once they got wind that we were buying property, they started jacking all the prices up. And then we went to the city council and we said to them, we want to build a book bindery here. We gave them all the plans, because we had people that were experts in all the areas of building, and we did all our P's and Q's, or our dot our I's and crossed our T's. And they refused to give us the permit. They said, no, we want more information. We want more information. 6 months, 8 months, they would not give us a decision. So we finally decided we're going to go to the county court and get filed what is called a mandamus, which requires them to do their official duties. Not that they should say yes or no, but that they should say either yes or no. And as soon as we got the court said, yes, we will issue the mandamus. You now must give them a decision. The next day they filed for disincorporation.
There's a lot of
They're trying every single trick in the book that they can.
Yes. And look, I understand them too. They have a certain way of life, and all of a sudden these aliens are coming in who are dancing in the street, who are laughing in the street, who have no problem with kissing one another and hugging one another in public. How that was considered to be so dangerous and so difficult for them.
Yeah. Are you two okay to stay like 15 minutes? I know for.
Sorry, I know.
Okay. No. I want to keep talking to you. So back to Osho on the ranch. So it's so funny. Like, this vision that I have of it is you're sitting with Osho every night, and he's doing the discourse, and you're doing the meditations, but from everything you described, you're just working and living on the ranch.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
What about, yeah, go ahead.
The visions you have are what happened in India in the 70s and in the 80s
and 90s.
and 90s. And it's still happening.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the meditations, the emphasis on meditation going in.
Mm. We had something that happened every day. It was called drive-by. And what Osho would do is that he would come down from what we call B site, where he lived, and he would drive past, and we would all be standing on the side of the road to his left. And we would bring, guitars and drums and singing and dancing, and he would come by, and some people would put roses on his car, and this was our being with Osho. This was the only experience that we had with him for 4 years.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing experience, and nobody wanted to miss it. Nobody wanted to miss it. And there came a time where because I was a lawyer, I was in the car behind him, because he used to drive at that time, early on, from the ranch all the way up to Madras, which is Madras, Oregon, not Madras, India, which is now Chennai, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so we were driving behind him just in case there was a need for a lawyer and a doctor, and there was also someone who was seated next to him. I can't remember who. Usually, someone that helped him. He would go to Madras, and then he would have a drink, and he would drink either bubbly water or he would drink Diet Coke. Diet Coke. He loved Diet Coke. And then eventually his doctor convinced him not to drink it because of the fake sweetness that was in it. So,
but the thing is, I would like to share.
Yeah.
If you, and I do feel this is true for if you meet any awakened person, and something, you're just pulled there or drawn there, there's such an energy field around them. There just is, because most of us are using our energy in our minds. We're thinking, it's our emotions, we're caught in all of this, we're in this little world. But they've entered a world where they understand the mind, but they've been able to observe it, and it's more distant, so they're not caught in it. So there's this incredible energy field of the universe, really. And they've dissolved in the universe, and they're always saying that's our potential too, to dissolve the universe. But I just want to say, so around such a person, there's this huge energy field, and that's how people are drawn to it. For centuries, that's how people have been drawn to different mystics. Yeah.
When I say that the ranch was built around power, when Osho stopped talking, and it was just a public talking, he spoke in private. He spoke to Sheila virtually every day, and he spoke to certain people periodically, to his doctor and his dentist and other people. It created a vacuum, a power vacuum, because Sheila became the disseminator of what Osho said. Whether he actually said it, I don't know. But Sheila would tell us what he said. And most of it made sense. Some of it didn't. I got to work closely with Sheila for periods of time as a lawyer. I was actually taking on trips when she went out of the ranch to go with her to the East Coast, to Chicago, to a few other places. And I would fly with them because I was the lawyer, to be there just in case there was a need for a lawyer to be there. But I can't help but feel so strongly that Osho was creating this vacuum of his absence, for us to start to experience what power was, and what we did with power, and how we gave up our power. There's a great quote I have upstairs somewhere to the effect, the easiest way to give up power is to think you don't have any.
Yeah.
So many people felt they didn't have any power, so they simply stayed. Many people, like myself, I wanted to be with Osho. I wanted to be in his presence. I wanted to be in his commune. I was willing to be a lawyer if I had to be a lawyer. I was willing to be a toilet cleaner if I had to be a toilet cleaner. I just wanted to be there. And so I was willing on certain levels to go to certain places where I felt like I was really giving up my own personal power, that I could have said something that I didn't say. I could have done something that I didn't do. And towards the end of before he actually started speaking, I realized I don't want to do this anymore. And then he started talking. And when he started talking, all the power that Sheila had evaporated. It used to be all of the press, they would come and they would talk to her because he wasn't available. Well, he started having press conferences. He started having all the people from all over the world ask him questions. And that's all recorded too, if you're ever interested. It's out there. And as a result, she was a nobody. Nobody wanted to talk to Sheila anymore. And very soon after that, she left. She left the ranch. And anyway, there's many other stories to tell. But this thing about power, so that when we got to Pune, in Pune too, and there were people that were new, that were still playing power games. I mean, Shanti and I were asked to set up a table to help people find jobs in the ashram at the time. And this woman was playing the game of trying to get to a space of power in the whatever it was that she perceived it to be. And we laughed at her sometimes because it was absolutely stupid. We had learned a lesson in Pune. Anyway, I know the time is going back quickly. I
feel like I could talk to you both for hours about this. So this is all so interesting, and I had no idea any of this. Like, I know you were there for the teachings, like you were there because you wanted to be with your guru. Do you feel like there were other people who maybe joined at the end who like didn't really, they wanted to be more a part of like the commune or like the party of it or whatever, like versus the people who were really there for Osho?
I think that's the case all the time, from the beginning to the very end. And it's not the end yet because there's still a communal environment there. I think that there, each one of us came. I always love to say, take a look and see, are you doing something because you're curious, or are you doing something because you're thirsty? And I use that as an analogy to wanting to come back home. I mean, some people are just curious about it because they really don't understand it. And some people want to be in a community, and some people want to have as much sex as they can have. And we're in an area where people are exploring that. It's available to them, if maybe not even because of their own energy level. So everybody comes with their individuality and where they are on their path of discovery. So there were a lot of people that came. There were people that came to Pune in 74, 75, who stayed for a short period of time and then moved into Pune itself and created little communities within there and never came back to the ashram, or only once in a blue moon came back to the ashram. So they originally were attracted there by maybe the community, by Osho, by his teachings, by whatever. I wasn't with Osho for teachings. It became so clear that I was there to be in the presence that was coming through him. Because it was a mirror for me to connect with the presence that's within this mind body.
I love that. So were you aware of what was going on with Sheila Town? You were the lawyer, right? Like, did you know all of that, like all the drama that was happening?
I knew.
Did Osho know all that drama was happening?
Well, I can't speak for Osho because I don't know what Sheila told him.
Sure.
But I'm assuming that because of his understanding and the vastness of his experiential reality, that he was probably aware of a lot of things. What he wasn't aware of, I don't know. People play the game of what did he know? When did he know it? What was his responsibility in it? But I can really speak that I did not take responsibility for myself in the beginning because I just wanted to be there with him. And it was only later that I started recognizing that what Osho was showing me was my own will to power, my own desire to have it over certain people, to be able to do things I wanted to do, how to use that in the politics of relationship. I saw all of that. Repeat again. What was the exact question? Because I kind of lost the.
I think you answered it. I mean, I was asking if you were aware of what Sheila was doing and what Osho was, but
Yeah. No, I was aware of what Sheila was doing.
A lot of people weren't. I worked in.
You were or weren't?
Not. I worked in Sheila's house at the end. I didn't know anything that was going on. I could tell you stories, billions of stories. I didn't know anything. When she left, it was like, oh my God. We opened up a room which we could no longer access. We were cleaning and cooking and taking care of the place. But that room we couldn't go in. It was where they were bugging Osho's house. They had wiretapping. And I mean, there's just so many. It's like an incredible story. But that's not really what's important.
No.
To me, what's important are the teachings and the depth of when you're with a master, how you can move inside if you're drawn to that. That's for me, like when you say that, when he speaks, everything in me just goes silent and my heart's pounding and I enter into this other world, and also when you're with a master, their teachings are breaking up your belief system. So often it's uncomfortable to hear what's being said. I mean, because it's uncomfortable. There's things you've always believed in that were given, that you were conditioned in. And it's a very different world. It's a whole different world, the master-disciple world.
And each of us was coming from where we were, which was an unconscious reality as well. A little bit, maybe a little spark of awareness was there for us from the meditation.
Yeah, I wanted to say another thing is, which I think is really cool, is this is my understanding, but I heard Osho say he didn't interfere with us. If we had a power trip to live out, he didn't interfere because that was part of that person's journey to live out this power dictatorship. I mean, in a way, I feel like with Trump, that's part of his journey right now, to live this out, to suddenly maybe go in shock. What am I doing? But that's his journey. And that was Osho. He did not interfere. There were really not many rules. I mean, you were there to discover all of the beauty within you and all of the toxins within you.
And the only real rules are the rules created by Sheila and by the people that worked for her. And there were rules. They made all kinds of rules about how we were supposed to be and not be and whatever. But it was all part of a learning. And the grace of Osho's presence, I feel, gave us the possibility that we could really learn from what was happening. There were people that came that saw what Sheila was doing and left because they saw that she was on a power trip and they were not willing to do that. They loved Osho. And there's all kinds of people that stopped loving Osho and left. There are people that loved Osho and realized that they were not going to stay because of Sheila. And then later they came back to Pune too. There are all kinds of different people in this. But in every step of the way with Osho, the only thing I can say is there was incredible potential to be a disciple. And disciple comes from the root to learn. Discipline means to learn. And that's what being a disciple was with Osho, that there was always something in what was happening for me to learn tremendously about who am I and what is this mind and what is this body. And it hasn't stopped. He's left the physical body, but this kind of opening is still available. And we have imbibed something. God only knows. And people tell us that they have experiences with us like you've described. And it's true. It happens. I don't take any credit for it. I don't even know who this I is that's talking about not taking credit.
I just appreciate so much everything you both just said. And just looking at it from that perspective of, wow, Osho was silent for years so that he could let these journeys play out so that you could learn and grow from that.
Exactly.
Like that's, it's like in some way he was absent, but like really he was just being the best teacher, right? By allowing it's like having a kid, right? You have to allow them to explore and get in trouble and mess up and do all the things, right? You can't just be there like helicopter parenting. So I just appreciate so much that point of view. And I think it's such a good time to pivot. Like, how are you two carrying out Osho's teachings? Tell me about what you're up to now. I know you have the meditation center.
Well, I can speak for myself and also what I do with Shanti as well. I started creating workshops. I did them in the early 80s, and I was ill-equipped and unprepared to be a facilitator, but I tried. And boy, did I have lessons to learn about what I was doing, and projections on people and all kinds of things, and judgments, everything the mind does. In 1988, I started doing something called Finding the Work You Love, Finding the Life You Love. And I started doing it in India, and I started doing it all over the world. And I've continued. Actually, we had one about 2 months ago, doing this workshop. And then from there, I started creating workshops around the issues that I saw that were significant for me, and that in my practice as a counselor, I saw in other people the same thing. One of the keys was worthiness. What is worthiness? And how do we lose it? Because every baby, if you hold them in your arms, is totally worthy, unequivocally worthy. And then something goes awry, and all of a sudden they have to be raised. They have to be taught to become something. They're not worthy unless they become something. So somewhere along the line, they've lost their worthiness. Well, that becomes a huge area. I have a workshop, a 3-day workshop, that I start to present my understandings, my experiences, the meditations that I have learned from Osho, and techniques that I have learned to help me explore that and sharing it with others. And I have a wide variety of those kinds of workshops that I do. How to love yourself. It's called How Can I Really Love Myself? Another one that we did fairly recently was called, and the workshop begins right now as I say this to you. What owns you? And you let that one sink in. And then you can even sit down and start writing a list of what owns you. And that became a wonderful meditative process for people. I started going to Mexico, and I did, at one point I was doing 4 to 6 meditation or retreats a year there. Now I'm doing 1 or 2 after COVID.
And are you still doing dynamic meditation online for people if they want to join? Or
Yeah.
has that stopped? Okay.
On Saturday online. So this is one, I mean, for me, when I still, my whole interest is to share the meditations with anybody. That's what I want to do. And so we have dynamic meditation every Saturday morning at 10, but it's online. And I show people how you can do it even in your apartment where you can't make noise, how you can do it so it's effective. It's the one meditation I don't really want anymore in our center because the possibility of so many germs being spread.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
And actually, the last time we were in San Francisco, which was the last time we taught at the place where you were, I got very sick, and it was something coming in that was like COVID, but we didn't know what COVID was. And other people, and I heard other people in that at that time got sick in the yoga studio, and so it was something going around. yeah, so I'm careful that way. That's one meditation we only do online now, but it's a great. I do want to say to people, our website is in transition, and so sometimes you might go to it and it might be down or there's sections missing. It's being worked on in a very Indian way, very and we just,
it's actually Pakistani.
And we have a new webmaster, and so sometimes it might be down, but most of the times a lot of it's up and running, and I don't know how long this will take, but it is happening. And yeah, we have dynamic and other active meditations.
I would invite anybody who is interested in the work that we're doing to connect with us. If you have a space where you have workshops, whether it's in San Francisco or whether it's wherever it is, I would be certainly interested if you would like us to come and do a workshop there to talk to you about doing that. We've done it. God, we've done it everywhere in the U.S. and in Mexico, probably 8 or 9 cities. I've done workshops there,
and in Europe,
and in Asia too, for that matter.
But since COVID, everything's less.
Everything is settled. So you can write Subhan at worldofmeditation.com, and I would be glad to give you any information that you're interested in. You can connect with us on our website. We are on Instagram. Shanti's
really.
She's the.
You're on there. I see you on there.
I was totally on it, and then I was like, I don't know, I'm just not now. But I like looking at Instagram.
I do write 3 or 4 times a week on Facebook, and I think it's called Subhan's Place on Facebook. But you can look for Subhan Shankar, and you'll find it. There's a real history of things that I've written.
We're on Facebook, and World of Meditation is on Facebook.
I just want to, for listeners, I just want to highlight. So I worked at a yoga company in San Francisco. They live in Seattle. They would fly out 3 or 4 times a year and run these phenomenal workshops. So really amazing, just life-changing experiences. So definitely when Subhan says hit them up and talk to them about flying out for workshops, do that because they're incredible. And join for dynamic meditation because it's amazing. It's a 5-part meditation done to music. There's breath work, there's catharsis, there's stillness, there's ecstatic dance, and what's the other one? The who, right? Moving the kundalini. So it's so powerful. These 2 human beings are just incredible. I mean it. Like when you described Osho's eyes, like that's how I feel about you too. I've never met anyone else in person like that. And you live the work and you walk the walk, and I'm so grateful to have you both in my life. I can't say that enough. I'm so grateful. And if you're listening, go check them out. Go take Dynamic on Saturdays. Thank you both so much for all of this, for your stories, for staying 20 minutes longer than we planned, and just for being such wonderful people and for being so open about all this. I really appreciate you both.
Chris, it comes, what comes around goes, or vice versa. I feel, I'll speak myself, and I'm sure I'm speaking for Shanti too, that we always delighted connecting with you when we came to San Francisco. And always felt a kinship with you, that we were on this path of discovery together. You are part of our Sangha. I hope we're part of your Sangha. And
it's amazing, your journey and your writing. God. You're a really good writer, and all the things that are happening.
Yeah, all the wonderful things. Yeah, you really are. You're blossoming, and I can feel it. And it's a very powerful.
And your path to
expression.
See your path and how it's unfolding.
Your
journey. Thank you both so much. Thank you. And thank you so much again. And if you're listening, send this to someone. Like, comment, share, subscribe, do all the things. And I will see you all on the next episode. Have a beautiful rest of your day.